Well, we're back at it again. So today we're going to do section 6.3, which is adding and subtracting fractions, and we're going to work with them whether they have the same denominator or whether they have different ones. So let's start with this one first because they already have the same common denominator, which makes life a little bit easier. Because they have the same common denominator, then we can just rewrite it as one single fraction problem and just put down one common denominator. So notice that the 4x minus 1 and the 2x minus 9 are just written down on the top of the fraction, and that the subtract sign that's between them is still between them. And now all we're left with is to simplify the top of the fraction. So if I simplify the top of the fraction, the 4x minus 1 stays, and the 2x minus 9 becomes negative 2x plus 9, because we get to use the distributive property. And then we got to go ahead and combine like terms. That'll leave me with 2x plus 8. And we also then have to go back and we have to simplify it if possible. So find the greatest common factor here, which is 2, and then x plus 4. And then we'll notice that the x plus 4s, they actually go away. Now this is not going to happen on a lot of the answers, but it does happen. So make sure that when you get down to what you think is the end, that you always try and factor it to see whether or not any factors will go away. So then I'm left with 2, and some of you are going to go, can I write that as 2 over 1? And I'm going to go, I don't care. But I can just write it as plain old 2. So that's what happens when you already have a common denominator. Keep the common denominator, add or subtract the stuff on top, combine like terms, simplify if possible. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Those are the 4 steps that you're going to use then. So on the one up here that doesn't have a common denominator to start with, we've got a x minus 2, and we've got a 10x squared minus 10x, x squared minus 10x plus 16. In order to find a common denominator, which is the least common denominator, we have to factor each one of the denominators. So x minus 2 doesn't really factor, it's already factored into x minus 2. X squared minus 10x plus 16, it factors into x minus 8 and x minus 2. So then what's part of the common denominator? Well, it's got an x minus 2 in it, and that's the same for both of them, so I only write it down once. And then it's got another x minus 8 that I haven't written down yet. So the common denominator is an x minus 2. Even though it's in both of them, I only write it down once, and an x minus 8. Now, what do I do with it after that then? Well, this already had an x minus 2 in it, and I need to have an x minus 2 and an x minus 8. So I need to change this common denominator by multiplying it by an x minus 8. And whatever you do on the top, you have to do on the bottom. So I have to multiply that x minus 8 on the top as well. Let's look at this fraction. This fraction already had these 2 factors in it. That's my common denominator, so I don't really need to change that fraction because it actually already had the common denominator. Now we need to work with the top of the fraction. So multiply that using your distributive property. Leave that because there wasn't anything to do. Write down the top of each one of them. And again, remember that's a subtract sign there, which subtract x and subtract negative 14 makes that minus x plus 14. Leave the common denominator, combine like terms, and then factor to see if it's possible to simplify that. And the top factors into x minus 7, x minus 2. So I am able to get rid of the x minus 2's, and I'm left with just x minus 7 over x minus 8. Okay, so let's try some of our own. And again, yeah, you guessed it, CUDA software, subtracting, adding fractions, either one. So let's work on number 5. First thing to decide about number 5 is, does it already have a common denominator? And it does. So I'm going to leave my common denominator of 6a squared plus 30a. And I'm just going to work with the stuff that's on top of the fraction. So now, what can I do with the stuff that's on top of the fraction? I can go ahead and use my distributive property. It gives me 4a minus 5 plus a minus 1. I'm going to keep my common denominator as I work all the way through this until I get down to the very last thing. Go ahead and combine some like terms there, and I get 5a minus 6 on the top. And now, the only thing that I can worry about is whether or not there's anything here that I'm going to be able to factor to get a common denominator to mark out. So I'm going to go with 6a as my greatest common factor, just to see if I can make this do anything. And it factors into 6a and a plus 5. Is any of this going to mark out with any of this? No, it's not. So that was a good idea, but it didn't make anything happen to make our answer any smaller. So we're done with the final answer of 5a minus 6 over 6a squared plus 30a. Let's try another one. Number 9. Number 9 has a 7x and a 2x and an x minus 2. Don't forget that subtract sign there. And a 20x plus 16. Does it already have a common denominator? No.